Come join me on my second channel, Jaguar Gator 8, where we'll talk all things college football. New video drops every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch the latest video. And now, on with our feature presentation. Think of how hard it is in the NFL to score a touchdown. Think of the preparation and the game planning that goes into it. Think of all the hard hours and reps spent at practice working on the play. Think of the countless hours of breaking down tendencies and trying to identify mismatches. And then, think of the work that the players have to put in on the field to pick up the blocks, execute their assignments, and get it done. Think of all the players that have played this great sport and how many of them never found the end zone once in their careers. Got all of that? Because today's story is about a man who scored a touchdown completely by accident. This is Miami Dolphins running back Troy Stradford. The Miami Dolphins running back scored 12 touchdowns over his entire NFL career. On 11 of those touchdowns, it was completely by design. He knew the ball was coming his way on a handoff, or he was running a route on a passing play, and Dan Marino found him for the score. But on the 12th touchdown, and on literally the very last touchdown that the man ever scored, he was never supposed to get the ball. He completely misheard the play call and was not expecting the ball to be in his arms whatsoever. And he found the end zone completely by accident. This is the story of one of the greatest and most beneficial mistakes in the over half-century plus long history of the Miami Dolphins. Before I talk about the accidental touchdown that no one saw coming, especially the player that wound up scoring it, we need some context to understand just who Troy Stradford is, how he was doing entering this game, and how the game was going, because it makes what happened all the more remarkable. When the Miami Dolphins drafted Stradford in the 4th round of the 1987 NFL Draft out of Boston College, they were expecting him to bolster up a rushing attack that was one of the worst in football, finishing 25th in rushing yards and 23rd in rushing touchdowns. Granted, it's not like they needed a great running game. They had the top offense in the league by averaging 26.9 points per game, and they led the league in just about every passing category. But another body and run support couldn't hurt. However, I don't think anyone expected just how good he would be right off the bat. Because in 1987, even though the Dolphins missed the playoffs with an 8-7 record, it was through no fault of Troy Stradford, who made about as good of a first impression as you could possibly make. Stradford played in 12 games during the 1987 season. Remember that the NFL canceled one of the games due to the strike, and then he had 3 games that were played with replacement players. So for all intents and purposes, Stradford played in every possible game as a rookie. He wound up leading the team by a fairly comfortable margin in rushing yards, picking up 619, rushing touchdowns, recording 6, and yards per attempt amongst all players with at least 20 carries, averaging 4.3 yards per run. He was also a lethal threat in the passing game, as he led the Dolphins with 48 receptions. By the time the season ended, Stradford had 1,076 yards from scrimmage. If this was extrapolated into a full 16-game season, he would have had well over 1,400 yards. Right off the bat, Stradford was a stud. He finished inside the top 10 in the entire NFL in rushing touchdowns, yards per attempt, and yards per touch, and finished 5th in all-purpose yards as well. It helped a lot, too, that he shone brightest on the biggest stage. He had 169 rushing yards on roughly 10 yards per carry against the Dallas Cowboys in a nationally televised Sunday Night Football game on ESPN. And he had 3 rushing touchdowns in a nationally televised Monday Night Football game on ABC against the New York Jets, both of which turned out to be wins for his team. And for his efforts, in 1987, Stradford was named the Offensive Rookie of the Year, becoming the first and to date only Dolphin to ever win this award. Yes, it was somewhat controversial, especially since the other major publications like UPI and Sporting News named St. Louis Cardinals tight end Robert Awalt the recipient of this award. But regardless, the prevailing thought was clear after the 1987 season. The sky was the limit for this guy. However, Stradford sort of fell off of a cliff after that. In 1988, his production dipped by a ton in the rushing department. He went from 619 rushing yards to 335, declining by 46% in that category, and his rushing touchdowns were cut by 2/3, as he went from 6 touchdowns to just 2. He also averaged nearly a full yard per carry less than he did as a rookie, going from 4.3 to 3.5. And he couldn't exactly blame the offensive line, because this was the same offensive line that went the final 75% of the season without allowing Dan Marino to get sacked a single time. You can learn more about that, which was one of the first videos I ever made, by clicking the card in the upper right corner. In 1989, he was leading the team with 240 rushing yards for the first 7 games. However, he suffered a season-ending knee injury, which not only left the Dolphins without their leading rusher, but without their leading punt returner. But as disappointing as 1988 and 1989 may have been, it was nothing compared to the start of the 1990 season before the game in question. Because 1990 was looking like a disaster in just about every sense of the word. Even though the Dolphins were winning games and were playing good football, as they were 10-3 through the first 14 weeks of the season, It had nothing to do with Troy Stradford, whose role was incredibly minimal by this point. After a great 1987 season where he came out of nowhere to win the most prestigious accolade that a rookie can realistically win, he was looking like a complete shell of himself. The season got off to a bad start when Stradford didn't even sign with the team until the regular season started. The Dolphins beat the New England Patriots 27-24 on September 9th, and Stradford only ended his holdout on September 10th. The Dolphins drafted a running back in the first round of the NFL draft, taking Sammy Smith, so that was going to reduce Stradford's role heavily. And when Stradford got on the field, which was seemingly getting rarer and rarer since he lost the starting running back job and lost the starting punt returner job, the results were not pretty. Entering Week 14, Stradford had just 114 rushing yards, averaging 9.5 rushing yards per game. For some perspective, here's how many rushing yards per game he was averaging on a per-season basis. Look at how low 1990 is compared to every other year. It was that bad. Now let's look at his receiving totals and see just how many receptions per game he was picking up in 1990 compared to every other year. At a mere 2.1 receptions per game, it's a full reception and a half worse than his previous worst season. And if we look at his receiving yardage totals per game compared to every other season, yeah, that's not good. He was averaging 19.8 yards per game when he averaged over 33 yards per game in 2 of his first 3 seasons. Stradford was being phased out and had no starts and no touchdowns through this point in the season. With that, we head down to Joe Robbie Stadium for this Week 15 AFC matchup between the Miami Dolphins and the Seattle Seahawks. It's December 16th, 1990, and these two teams were battling against each other in what I describe as perfect football weather. You can't do much better than 71 degrees in December and clear skies. This was a monumental game for both sides. For the Seahawks, they were tied with the Houston Oilers and Pittsburgh Steelers for the final wildcard spot in the conference at 7-6. Remember that 1990 was the first normal season that 6 teams in each conference made it to the postseason. They needed this win to keep their hold on a possible playoff spot. As for the Dolphins, they were 10-3. A win here would officially clinch them a playoff spot and would set up a first-place battle for the AFC East crown and the number 1 seed, as the Dolphins entered this game trailing by 1.5 on Buffalo. We know the stakes, we know what's on the line, it's time to play some football. To start the game off, both offenses were able to drive down the field before getting stopped in the red zone and settling for chip shot field goals. Seattle got the ball first, and after they got to midfield on the very first play from scrimmage, they eventually got it down to the 7-yard line before stalling and being forced to settle for a 24-yard field goal from Norm Johnson. As a side note, if you want to learn more about the career of Norm Johnson and a really hilarious mistake he made, click the card in the upper right corner. Miami responded by driving down the field and stalling at the 15-yard line, settling for a 32-yard field goal from Pete Stoyanovich. Finally, we had a defensive stop at the start of the second quarter. However, it was all for nothing, because Troy Stradford was about to make an absolutely critical mistake. Despite being the primary punt returner in 1989 before his injury, Stradford had not done this role in 1990. Stradford returned just 2 punts all season, but he was back there as the team's primary punt returner in this game. And it immediately backfired, as after muffing the punt, it was recovered by defensive back Mel Jenkins, which gave the Seahawks the ball all the way down to the 2-yard line. It was a costly and seemingly disastrous mistake which the Seahawks immediately capitalized on, as on the very first play following the muff, Derek Fenner punched it in from 2 yards out to give the Seahawks a 10-3 lead. All of the life seemed to be taken out of Joe Robbie Stadium after that, and even though head coach Don Shula told Stradford to just forget about it and move on, he knew that considering the game and the season he was having, he was on thin ice, especially since every subsequent punt return of the game was held by Mark Logan. As Stradford said, after you do something like that, you have to concentrate a little harder and make the play the next time, because if you make 2 mistakes in a row, you're probably finished for the day. And in Stradford's case, considering how the year was going, you might be finished for good. Fortunately for Miami, they were able to tie it up later in the quarter after the Seahawks muffed a punt of their own, returning the favor quite nicely by setting up the Dolphins with a goal-to-go situation. That drive ended with Dan Marino finding James Pruitt in the end zone for a 4-yard touchdown pass to tie the game at 10 apiece. Fun fact, this was the last touchdown of Pruitt's entire NFL career, so you're witnessing a tiny bit of history on this play. And on the very next drive, the Dolphins were once again poised to score after Dan Marino connected with Tony Martin on a 45-yard gain. This was Martin's only catch of the day, and man was it a big one. A couple of plays later, Stradford would get the ball and plow ahead for a gain of 13, giving the Dolphins a first down and setting Miami up with first and goal on the 6-yard line. What happens next was a shock to just about everyone, because what Troy Stradford was about to do was completely by accident.
They're going with the hurry up. The misdirection. Touchdown Miami! And Troy Stradford. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16 17 18 19 20 21 22 23 24 25 26 27 28 29 30 31 32 33 34 35 36 37 38 39 40 41 42 43 44 45 46 47 48 49 50 51 52 53 54 55 56 57 58 59 60 61 62 63 64 65 66 67 68 69 70 71 72 73 74 75 76 77 78 79 80 81 82 83 84 85 86 87 88 89 90 91 92 93 94 95 96 97 98 99 100 101 102 103 104 105 106 107 108 109 110 111 112 113 114 115 116 117 118 119 120 121 122 123 124 125 126 127 128 129 130 131 132 133 134 135 136 137 138 139 140 141 142 143 144 145 146 147 148 149 150 151 152 153 154 155 156
nice 6-yard touchdown run by Stradford for his first score of the entire season. This was the play to get the monkey off of his back, and he was super excited about that touchdown, and understandably so, considering everything he'd been through and the tough year he had so far. Stradford kept the touchdown ball all the way back to the sidelines, where he then immediately handed it to equipment manager Bob Monica so that Stradford could get it back after the game. As Stradford said, "I've been trying to get a touchdown ball for Dr. Peter Indelicato. I can finally ship it to him now." It was a great job by Stradford to hit the hole, plow his way through a few Seahawk defenders, and stay upright until he reached the end zone. This score was absolutely critical, as it gave Miami a 17-10 lead and all the momentum heading into the halftime break. And from that point on, the Dolphins never trailed. They extended their lead in the third quarter after Dan Marino hit Pharrell Edmonds on an 11-yard touchdown to make it 24-10, and they held on to win the game by a final score of 24-17, officially clinching a playoff spot. You could make the argument that Stradford's touchdown was the most important play of the entire game. But the crazy part about that play? Yeah, that was completely by accident. Turns out, Stradford had no idea what the heck was called. He never thought he was supposed to be getting the ball. Now, before we go any further, I should note that this is not the first time I've done a video on a player accidentally scoring a touchdown without knowing what was going on. In 1980, legendary St. Louis Cardinals running back Otis Anderson did this in an upset victory over the Philadelphia Eagles. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. As for this play in Miami a decade later, you might have thought on first glance that the misdirection and the stutter was completely planned and was an attempt to catch the Seahawks off guard. Nope, it was because the running back himself was caught off guard. What happened was that the Dolphins went into a no-huddle offense after the last play, when Stradford gained 13 yards in a completely designed play. When Marino was calling out the signals, Stradford heard the number 54. Now the Dolphins have two different plays called 54. One of them is called 54 straight, which is a handoff to the fullback. The other one is called 54 lag, which is a halfback draw. Stradford thought that Marino called 54 straight, and that the ball was going to Mark Logan. Coincidentally, Logan was the man who replaced Stradford on every punt return for the rest of the game. However, what Marino called in actuality was 54 lag, meaning that Stradford was going to be getting the ball. When Stradford saw that Logan was not taking the ball, he looked like a deer in headlights. Marino just placed the ball in his arms, and Stradford just started running. And he started running until he found the end zone. If this play ended in disaster, especially after Stradford's muff earlier in the first quarter, then Stradford would probably be benched for the rest of the game and might be done for good. However, this play seemingly saved his career. Stradford was not only thrilled about the touchdown because it got the monkey off of his back, but because it spared him big time. As Stradford said after the game, "I was due, and I wasn't going to be denied. The first thing I thought about was, finally, I got a touchdown. And I knew I wasn't going to get yelled at because I scored, even though I blew the play." But perhaps the even crazier part about all this is that this accidental touchdown that Stradford had no idea was coming turned out to be the final touchdown that he ever scored. Unfortunately for Stradford, just as it finally seemed like he could relax a bit more, he hit the lowest point of his professional career in Week 16 against the Buffalo Bills. Because in that 24-14 loss, which clinched the Bills the AFC East title, Stradford tore his hamstring. He touched the ball one time, and that was enough to wreck him. The torn hamstring meant that he would be placed on injured reserve and would be out for the remainder of the season, as he missed the team's first playoff appearance since 1985. And as it turned out, that game against the Seahawks was the last time he ever suited up at home at Joe Robbie Stadium, because his time with the Dolphins came to an end after the 1990 campaign. Stradford signed with the Kansas City Chiefs in 1991, but did next to nothing there. He had one rushing attempt for 7 yards and had 9 receptions for 91 yards, as he finished the season with less than 100 yards from scrimmage. 4 years ago, the man had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage in a strike-shortened season. The season-ending injuries from 1988 and 1990, however, had taken a toll on him, as for the first time in his career, he was held without a touchdown all season. Stradford then found himself on the Los Angeles Rams and Detroit Lions in 1992, but once again did nothing, as he scored no touchdowns and had just 56 yards from scrimmage all year. From there, Stradford never played in the NFL again. By the time he ended his career, he had 2,859 yards from scrimmage and 12 touchdowns. For a fourth-round pick, that's pretty solid. However, considering he had more than half of those touchdowns and more than a third of those yards as a rookie, and considering how high of a peak his career started at by winning Offensive Rookie of the Year, it is somewhat of a disappointment. But it's crazy how of the 12 touchdowns that Stradford scored, the final one, and his final positive memory in the NFL, was a touchdown that he never knew was coming his way. He completely botched the play, and had no idea whatsoever as to what he was doing or as to what his assignment was. But that didn't stop him from finding his way into the end zone even if it took him a while to understand what was going on. Considering how this was Stradford's swan song, considering how good and strong this touchdown was, and considering the fact that the score helped Miami win the game and break their half-decade-long playoff drought, this might be the greatest mistake and the most beneficial mistake in the history of the Dolphins franchise. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.